back to the Stadium View, another edition of the fifth quarter, week number 3. And let's all toast to the end of training camp, ladies and gentlemen. The final public practice was today, and it wasn't so public because they had to go inside of the Hudson Center, but I survived another training camp. And we're almost ready to play some real games, especially after what happened Friday night on an Oakland. Packers fall to the Raiders 13-6. Got one left in Kansas City on Thursday night. Big week for the boys in the bubble. We'll take you back to Oakland and spend a little time on that game, but we're going to look back on 100 years of Green Bay Packer football with our special guest, Christl, in the house tonight. Will be joining us in a couple of minutes. Alongside, as usual, Matt Z. Hello, Matthew.
Not impressed by game number 3?
No, not really impressed. Couple of players made some plays, but on the whole, I thought the defense was okay. Not bad. Kept the Raiders out of the end zone until the last couple of minutes. But there were some problems up front for the QBs. We'll hear about that in just a second. But, yeah, very disheveled, disorganized game with I don't know how many second and 18s, third and 21s they had in that game. But it's awfully hard to play that way.
Yeah, I think 13 total penalties, sacks all over the place. But, I mean, when you don't start your normal guys on the offensive line, you're expecting to have some growing pains for sure. But on the defensive side, you got some young, talented, ball-hawking cornerbacks right now.
Those corners are picking it up.
Yeah.
Jair Alexander with his first, Josh Jackson with another, and, well, that one didn't count, but it was a pretty play nonetheless. And they're getting after it. And, of course, the play of those young DBs made one of the veteran DBs expendable. Well, he wasn't really a veteran, but Lindsey Pipkins was jettisoned to Indianapolis yesterday in that trade for linebacker Antonio Morrison, who arrived today and practiced for the first time, just getting his feet wet, just trying to figure out where everything is. But as a guy that enters his third year, he was a fourth-round pick in 2016 out of Florida, led the Colts in tackles last year, but a change in coach, change in scheme. He is literally an inside linebacker, and not a big one at that. He's only like 6'1", 215, but he's a downhill run-playing inside backer, not the fleetest of foot. But because there's Blake Martinez and nothing but kids in diapers around him, they had to get somebody that has played a little bit in the NFL.
Oh, absolutely, and especially with Oren Burks during preseason, the pregame warm-ups dislocating that shoulder. That's never a good thing. So hopefully that heals fine, and that's not a lingering issue for that guy. He's been having a really nice
solid. Yeah, I think they're really happy with Oren Burks. It's not a long-term deal, McCarthy said today, so I don't think he'll play in Kansas City on Thursday night, but hopefully he'll be ready for the big one against the Bears on September the 9th.
And with Morrison, I believe he was taken 6 picks before Blake Martinez in that draft. Just before.
Well, I think the Packers did a better job scouting than did the Indianapolis Colts, because I think Blake Martinez is a pretty good linebacker. So, a lot to get to tonight. Let's get started, shall we? Let's go back to the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum. And there's a reason I don't travel in the preseason, and one of them is the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum. If that place could fall down tomorrow, and it just might, it wouldn't miss it. The they haven't spent a dime on that building in, I bet, 30 years. Other than the tarp that covers the entire upper deck, because not enough fans go to Oakland anymore.
Where does that rank on your least favorite places to watch a game?
Stadium-wise?
Yeah.
One of the worst. And I'll see another one at FedEx. Washington, D.C. is absolutely miserable.
Are those your bottom two, or are there ones that are further down?
I'd have to think about that, but they're certainly up there. But holy cow. Even McCarthy said we took 2 planes to travel. They're going to take 2 planes every game this year. And we kept a lot of guys home. We didn't even bring them because he says the locker room is so small we wouldn't have anywhere to dress them anywhere. In the hallway, I swear. That's how bad that place is.
Overcrowding issues.
I know. I don't know how the A's can endure that place. But anyway, on to the game. 13-6, the final. Mike McCarthy called it a sloppy one. And as I said, a hard one to evaluate quarterback play because the offensive line had a downright horrible night.
From a protection standpoint, as poor of a performance as we've had. The penalties, I think we had 7 or 8 plays where we were longer than 19 yards for a conversion. So I mean it was such an unbalanced challenge.
Very unbalanced challenge. 5 sacks, as you mentioned, a handful, a whole bunch of penalties, 13 for $110. On that offensive line, none of the preferred starters even played a snap. I mean, it was, what did they go? Kyle Murphy until his ankle went bad. He's back in a walking boot on his right ankle after breaking his left ankle last year, or his left foot. Then you had, left guard was, I believe, Lucas Patrick, maybe? No, he was center. They had Pankey on the line, and they had Spriggs on the other line. I talked to Adam Pankey, who said it was a night where everything that could go wrong, yeah, it did.
Sure felt like it. Felt like we got to a fast start. We started connecting on some plays, started moving the ball a little bit. And then one mistake after the other, a lot of penalties.
A lot of penalties. One that took away a touchdown on the ground. Yeah, Pankey was the left guard. Byron Bell was over at right guard for the Packers on Friday night. One player on offense who needed a big game actually had one. How about Jamon Moore? 4 catches, 62 yards.
Tonight, I just went out there and I wanted to be me. And felt like people kind of slept on me a little bit because, I've had some adversity, a rough start. But tonight, I just put that all behind me. Like, I know what I wanted to do, and I went out there and did it to the best of my ability. So I'm not going to do nothing but stand on it and get better and take it day by day.
He was hearing the whispers about the very inconsistent play at camp. A lot
Some
of drops,
Yep.
a lot of missed routes, things like that. But I'll tell you what, Z, he might have the most ability of all of those 3 draft choice receivers. That's why he was taken first among the 3 between Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Equiminius St. Brown. And if he starts to come around the way he came around a little bit Friday night,
Aaron
he's gonna get on
Rodgers,
the field.
yeah, Rodgers talked about that in the media, after a practice, was all he really needs to do is just have one of those days where everything clicks and he starts making some plays and just settles down and realizes, all right, I can do this. We're all good. And then the plays will start piling up for him.
Followed it up with a pretty decent practice today, but only 228 yards on offense for the Packers against that Raider defense. And when Oren Burks injured his shoulder in pregame warmups, it was undrafted rookie free agent Greer Martini out of Notre Dame who got the last-minute call as the understudy.
So it was kind of like just right before the game and it happened. It was like, hey, base defense would be starting at the will linebacker spot. And of course, it's, for me, going from being where I was at to now starting a game was an awesome experience as well. It was a great opportunity.
Very good opportunity, and he made the most of it. He had 3 tackles, did recover a fumble for the Packers on defense. And as a whole, Dean Lowry thought the D was okay.
Yeah, I think this game was a big test for us. That was a very physical O-line. They played their starters for much of the first half, so we knew that the challenge for us would be getting off blocks and just staying on our gap and staying sound. So I thought we did that, and I thought we had a really good first half.
I thought they had a decent first half as well.
Absolutely.
So, a lot to work on still, lots of corrections. No one seriously injured in that game. We mentioned Murphy with the foot. We mentioned Burks with the shoulder. Ty Montgomery left with a foot injury, but Ty was out practicing today. And the Packers on the final camp practice were inside the Hudson Center, as I mentioned. Aaron Rodgers did not practice today. Home ill.
Aw.
Well, he had an up-close look at that offensive line, and I don't think he's quite recovered from that yet either.
Yeah.
So he'll get over it.
Or Danica's in town. Who knows?
Maybe. But other than that, the only guys that didn't practice were Murphy, Burks, Jake Kummerow, and Rodgers. Kummerow's still coming off that shoulder stinger, crossing his fingers he can play against the Chiefs.
How do you think they handle game number 4 with players that dress and players that don't?
I think it's going to be the same kind of thing. Now, today they had the 5 starting offensive linemen practicing team reps, and they got more snaps together today than they have all summer.
Okay.
So that's a good sign, with Balaga and with Taylor and with Lindsley and with McCray and with Bakhtiari across the line. So whether or not they get in a series or 2 on Thursday night, Taylor says, I don't know if he told me, I don't know if we really need it. It would be nice if it happens, but if it doesn't, no big deal. He says we go up against a pretty good D-line every day, and I think if we can block those guys, we should be able to block just about
It's
anybody.
interesting how that's changed over the years. And even watching other teams playing this weekend for game number 3, they were still leaving their number 1s and number 1 QBs for a whole first half.
Yeah.
And then you look at how the Packers approach game 3. It was, we're not starting any of our number 1s on offense.
If you still have a relatively young starting quarterback, I would play him. I would play him a lot. They need a lot of snaps. If you've got a 14-year guy who's won a couple of MVPs.
Regular season's the thing.
The regular season
Stay
is the
healthy,
thing. And one game away from that as the Packers take on the Kansas City Chiefs on Thursday night. We welcome our listeners in Sheboygan and Wausau and our viewers online across all of the Midwest communication stations. We are live from the Stadium View on Holmgren Way. Great reason to come on down tonight. We're going to be sending someone off to the Packer Pro Shop from our friends at Robinson's. We'll also be playing our hot and cold game. We got the new Era caps, the road hats tonight. These are what they'll wear on the road. So in honor of their trip to Oakland, we got a New Era road hat for you to give away as well tonight. And when we come back, the team historian of the Green Bay Packers, Christl, will be joining us live from the View. You got any notes on what's coming up here?
Just that it's an awesome place.
Yes, it is. We love it here. It looks great, and it's going to rev up big time in a matter of a week.
Yeah, great specials every night of the week. Great outdoor music. Most nights. Yeah, it's a great place to be.
They'll go crazy.
Come watch the Brewers games here, of course, as they try to get into October.
Not tonight, though. They're in Cincinnati tomorrow. All right, so we're talking football, and we're talking a whole lot of football, like 100 seasons worth. Christl joins us when the fifth quarter returns right after this timeout. Don't go away.
We now return you to the fifth quarter, live from the Stadium View Bar and Grill. Here are Mark Daniels and Matt Z.
All right, welcome back to the View, everybody. Packers fall to the Raiders, the Chiefs to come, and then they play for keeps on September 9th with the Bears coming to Lambeau in the Prime Time Show. One of my favorite shows during the preseason because, we can't get the players on until training camp, but we've had a little fun with Mark Murphy. We had a little fun with Brian Gutekunst, and first time I met this guy, I was a Cub reporter in the midst of the Bart Starr era, and he kind of mentored me along and literally showed me the finest taverns in every NFL city over the course of the first 20 years of our relationship. Nearly killed me, but we're both still alive and going strong. And after a very distinguished career as a writer for the Green Bay Press-Gazette, Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, he's now on board with the Packers as the team historian, and I think he's pretty busy these days, what with 100 seasons to write about. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the View in the fifth quarter, Christl, back with us again. Hi, Cliff.
Good to be with you.
I don't want to go any further into the tavern stories.
I would like to.
We had a few.
We found some good ones.
We found some good ones, indeed. But all in good fun. What a project they've bestowed upon you to try and chronicle the 100 seasons of Green Bay Packer football. It's got to be a pretty daunting task.
Well, I think the Cardinals turned 100 previously, and I don't even know if they had any kind of a celebration because they moved so many times. We beat the Bears to 100, beat the NFL to 100. So there's a lot of things that are going to be going on this year. We're working on a documentary, a decade-by-decade history of the Packers. And also I'm going to be working on a book about the 100-year history. And then there are a lot of other special events.
Well, they had the Packer Experience to kick off training camp. They got the gigantic celebration next week, or 2 weeks, with the Steve Miller Band coming to town for that concert on Saturday night before the game. Obviously, all kinds of stuff has been out on Packers.com through the course of the year. When will this documentary come out as a whole, or is it going to be kind of like a Game of Thrones series that we're going to have to tune into?
No, I believe it'll come out in the whole, and prior to the August 11, 2019, which is our 100th anniversary. So this will be the 100th season. August 11th will be the 100th birthday or anniversary next year.
Of 2000, of 19.
2019,
yeah. All right.
Sorry.
So the book, how's that coming along?
Slowly.
I know.
I need to start tackling it.
Oh, my God. So I've talked to you over the years, Cliff. We've talked so much history about this team. What, other than the fact that it just survived, is that the major feature of this franchise? We all know it's the NFL's smallest market, smallest town, but time after time after time after time, this thing was given up for dead. But somehow there's a $500 million palace a block away from here that is a shrine in the NFL, and it's a remarkable story.
Yeah, survival's a miracle, and then on top of that, it's also been the most successful franchise in the history of the NFL with 13 championships. That's 4 more than anybody else. When you put the two together, I just feel like this is the greatest story in sports. There's certainly no NFL team that can match our history. Maybe somebody could argue the New York Yankees, but I'm not aware of any other professional sports team that can.
Montreal Canadiens?
Yeah, I suppose Montreal or Toronto, Canadian hockey teams. But I really think that the only other franchise that comes close to matching our history are the Yankees.
Really? All right.
You mentioned survival is a miracle for this franchise. Expand upon that statement.
Well, I tell people that the franchise was born on August 11, 1919. And from that day, really until 1950 for sure, maybe until the stadium was built in 1957, that the Packers were perpetually on their deathbed. I mean, there were very few days during that period of 30-plus years where they weren't in danger of folding. The first year in the NFL, they got booted out of the league at the end of the season for playing Notre Dame, using Notre Dame players.
Curly wooed some buddies up here to play, right?
Actually, that first season, because of the turnover, 1919, 1920, the semi-pro seasons, the Packers relied mostly on players from Green Bay East and West high schools. In 1921, once they got through their preseason games, they realized they had to replace those players, started recruiting guys with college and even some pro experience from across the Midwest. And you're not going to like to hear this, but for the final 3 games of the year, the Packers had to practice in Chicago before the games because there weren't enough players living in Green Bay. They were spread all over Midwest. And yes, they used 3 players from Notre Dame. Hunk Anderson and O.J. Larson were 2 of them, and I just learned on my trip around Lake Superior this past week that they were from Calumet, Michigan. Same hometown as the Gipper.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. So the league booted him out for using players with college experience left, or eligibility left, correct?
Correct, against Racine in a non-league game.
How did Curly convince him to get back into what was now being formed instead of the American Professional Football Association, I think it was called, to the National Football League in 21?
Well, Lee Remmel used to always tell me that Curly could charm the birds out of trees, and I think that was a big part of it. He was a great salesman. Plus, I think even in that first year, the people realized that this was a pretty special place in terms of being regarding the people's passion for football. And then they really lucked out at the end of the year because they got a chance to play the Cardinals and Bears in Chicago for their last 2 league games. Actually, the Chicago Staleys at the time. And that was a big deal. And George Halas wasn't being a friend of the Packers. He was in a tight race for the league championship.
And he thought he could beat him.
And he needed a team to beat to give him a better chance. At that point in time, you scheduled week to week, and he just wanted to play an extra game that would give him an inside track in the league title. I think it was the Buffalo All-Americans that he was in the race with.
I'm going to go look at that. Yeah, we're going back to 1921. Yeah, 1921. Yeah, the Buffalo All-Americans. They both finished 9 wins, 1 loss, and the Staleys had 1 tie, and the All-Americans had 2 ties. So it was based on 1 less tie that they were able to claim the league championship in 21.
Well, I think what happened was, I haven't looked at this in a while, but what happened was that they played the Buffalo All-Americans on Thanksgiving, then played the Packers on Sunday. And what they needed was, I think the Buffalo All-Americans might have beaten them, and so they needed to pick up an extra win to tie in the standings.
So they got it, and they won that game, obviously. So away they go. So they get back in, and that was only the first of, obviously, as he was alluding to, just several hurdles. It was a difficult sell. They had to continue to garner support from local businessmen just to have enough money to cover uniforms, everything else that went along with it.
Yeah, when I started with the first league season, 1919, the Packers played on a vacant lot in Hagemeister Park. No fence, no bleachers. People stood around the sidelines to watch the game. Some people drove up in their cars, or I'm told even their horses and wagons. And the only way they made a few bucks because George Whitney Calhoun walked around and passed a hat looking for some spare change from the people who were there.
There were dozens of little town teams, though, just forming at that time, too, weren't there, Cliff? All around the Midwest and Michigan.
Basically everybody had a town team. The Packers played mostly teams in the state of Wisconsin or the UP those first 2 seasons. Sheboygan, New London, Oshkosh, towns like that, Stambaugh, Michigan, Ishpeming, Michigan, and it was pretty much the case everywhere. Ohio is considered the birthplace of pro football.
Okay. But you mentioned George Whitney Calhoun, and Pete Doherty wrote a story last week in the Press-Gazette about how that newspaper really helped fuel interest, channel interest, and just become really kind of the mouthpiece for Curly's vision.
Yeah, I don't think the Packers would have survived without the Green Bay Press-Gazette. Keep in mind 2 things. The Packers did not have an office building until 1950 when they moved to Washington Street.
Was it Curly's house, George?
No, they in the building at the south end of what was a downtowner.
All right.
Hotel. It's still there, and
they had our show from there for a couple of years in Vince's old office,
the old Warriors pub,
yeah.
and then and they had no full-time employees other than Curly. He was, and I don't know if Curly was even full-time because he was selling insurance for the Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance Company during the off season. So Curly, maybe 30s, 40s, he started working at least 9 months a year and then heading to California for a chunk of the off season.
All right.
Where he met his second and third wives.
Second and third, yeah. That we know of? Yeah, really. Amazing.
You go from selling insurance in the offseason to now you can make $10 to $15 million a year playing the game. Quite a difference,
well,
right?
actually, when Curly started, when he was playing and coaching in the early 20s, he was selling clothes on the floor of Stiefel's men's clothing store in Washington Street. Anybody in here my age or at least close to it might remember Stiefel's.
I remember Stiefel's. Yeah, I'm close to your age. Well, and that's just the birth of this franchise. We got a long way to go and a lot of ground to cover. Cliff Christl is our guest tonight. We'll talk more about the Packers' glorious history with a team historian and when the 5th quarter returns after this timeout.
Live from the Stadium View Bar and Grill, here are Mark Daniels and Matt Z.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Packers cranking it up. They only have one more close workout tomorrow, and then they fly to Kansas City. They'll take on the Chiefs and Andy Reid's club at Arrowhead Thursday night. Cut the roster by Saturday, and then, we're less than 2 weeks away from the Bears on opening night. Cliff Christl, our guest tonight, Packer team historian. Back with more of Cliff in just a moment, but it's time for our hot play of the day. Our friends at Robinson want to give you some prizes tonight if you can guess the hot play of the game from Friday night, and you'll also get qualified for a grand prize drawing at the end of the year. A pair of indoor club seats to the Packers finale against the Detroit Lions on the regular season finale. So they're lined up and ready to fire away. Let's see if we can't get a winner.
We got Don up first. Don, what's your guess?
Alexander's touchdown on the 10-yard line.
What was that?
Alexander's
Jair
interception.
Alexander's ragtime band? Yeah, that's exactly it, Don. We're giving the hot play to number 1 pick, Jair. An athletic pick inside the 10. It came early in quarter number 2.
Second down and 4. Slot right, slot left. Connor Cook shotgun. Doug Martin to his left. Cook pointing across to the formation. Packers have a single safety high. Snap to Cook. Steps, looks, rifles over the right side. Intercepted. It's Jair Alexander, the rookie. He turns the corner at the 5 and is walked down inside the 10-yard line of the Green Bay 7 Packers football.
Yeah, there you go. Wayne Larrabee on the call on the Packer Radio Network. Jair really wanted to make a play after giving up that 49-yard catch to Amari Cooper to open the game.
That first play of the game, though, that was a welcome to the NFL kind of play for me. So, I had to bounce back after that one. So, after that one, I needed that one. Felt more comfortable. It's my first game at corner. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty cool. Jair Alexander. And Don, you're a winner. We'll do a Coldplay a little bit later on. That kid looks good. Cliff, you don't get out to practice or anything anymore, do you?
No, I'm too busy in the office.
Yeah, I can imagine. Best player you covered? Other than Favre.
James Lofton, I think.
Really?
Maybe Gail Gillingham.
Gillingham.
I started covering the team a little bit in 70, regularly in 74. I tell people, the two greatest players in Packers history, without question, are Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. I don't think anybody else is even in the conversation.
Hudson?
Maybe Hudson. He was. Everybody considered him a great player, but his biggest stats came during the war years when the league was pretty lean on talent. And Lombardi said Paul Hornung was his greatest player. I just don't think he did it long enough.
Yeah, he had the 1 year for gambling. Injuries ruined it earlier than obviously he wanted, and he really was a player without a position for the first couple of seasons here.
Yeah, he struggled his first 2 years, found himself under Lombardi, and was a great player for about a handful of years. He doesn't get the credit he deserves because his stats don't translate to today's game. But as I said, Lombardi called him his greatest player. Who am I to argue?
I wouldn't argue with that either. Do you know if they even tried him at quarterback? Did he come here?
Played a little bit, and that didn't work out.
All right. Z, what do you got?
Do you have a favorite era or decade over the course of this franchise?
Oh, I think the 1920s, because of the factors at play in the Packers' survival. I'd have loved to have followed the team through that decade. Just so much history there. And so much of it, I think, has been lost. The Packers, the league cut out most of its small towns in 1927. It cut from 22 to 12 teams. They basically lost Canton, Columbus, Ohio, all these charter franchise teams that had started football well before they did in Green Bay. And not only did the Packers survive, but that was 1927. There were 3 meetings when the cuts were made, and the Packers and Green Bay hosted one of them. And it was largely because the owners loved coming to Green Bay. The players loved coming to Green Bay. Packers did not draw any better than the teams like the Canton Bulldogs, Columbus Panhandles, the teams that folded. There just weren't enough people here. They were in the same boat as those other cities. But Green Bay didn't obey the law of prohibition. And so the tavern stayed open here. There was a thriving red light district on the north side.
Get out of here.
In 1928, the city, after a federal raid by the prohibition agents, the city council in Green Bay passed a resolution saying, stay out of our business. We want the local sheriff's department to run the...
Who's on the council, Capone?
Well, actually, there were several sheriffs over a period of time that ran the most popular bars in town during Prohibition. If you owned a tavern, you were also probably sheriff, at least for a few years during that period. So it was well known that teams would come to Green Bay, and then they'd come a week early, they'd stay a week late. This was just a wide open city. Art Rooney told me that in 1933, Art Rooney Jr. told me that his dad told him in 1933, when the Pittsburgh, then Pirates, now Steelers, came to town for the first time after they entered the league. Some fans came with them, and the train rolled into the Milwaukee Road Depot, and the fans went out and found out that this was during a period they eased in the end of Prohibition. For a short period of time, bars throughout the country were allowed to sell 2-3 beer. They converted from no beer to 2-3 beer to the regular beer, regular alcohol content. Well, this was during a time period when everybody else in the country had to settle for 3-2 beer. But Green Bay, because they never shut down, was still selling the regular
good stuff.
So the fans got off the train, went to a bar, realized they were selling real beer in Green Bay, and came back yelling to everybody else in the train. And Rooney said nobody that went with him. Art Jr. said his dad told him that all the fans who came to Green Bay with him never saw the game.
So we go back to how Mark introduced you, and tells us that you show him all the bars on the road. Now we know why you wanted to live during the 1920s and follow this team, because
the bars were roaring.
The real beer in Green Bay.
And that prohibition is an interesting story too. The mob never moved into Green Bay, and Mary Jane Herber at the local library, head librarian of Brown County Library, and somebody else at some points told me that the reason for that was it was such an open city they couldn't get a foothold here.
You're going to have to deal with the sheriff every time you step into a bar. It's an amazing story. And the 20s also, Curly, you talk about this a lot, really did have an eye for talent. The kid was in his mid-20s, but he found some players, and suddenly he recruited players that became a part of the 29, 30, 31, 3 in a row NFL champions.
Yeah, his first coup was Vern Llewellyn, one of the greatest Packers. Again, it's an injustice he isn't in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Then in 29, he signed Johnny Blood, Cal Hubbard, Mike Michalski from other teams. All three are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Probably, to this day, the greatest off-season coup in terms of talent signings in the history of the league. And then Ron Wolf and I talk about this all the time, and Ron makes the point, how in the world did he get somebody like Don Hudson from Alabama, Clark Hinkle from Bucknell to come to Little Green Bay to play football before there was an NFL draft? I did some research on Hinkle, and one of the reasons he ended up here was that Bucknell played Fordham when both were football powers in New York, when the Packers played the Giants in that 29-31 period when they won their 3 championships. And those Packer Giant games were so huge. And he became a Packer fan because Bucknell was in town to play Fordham, and they stayed over and went to the Giants-Packers game.
That was one of the things you talk about, too, is that the Packers could barely draw. East-West game drew better than the Packers back in the day. But when they went to New York and they were beating the Giants, suddenly the charm of the little city against the Goliath, Gotham, became something.
Yeah, the East-West game outdrew the Packer-Bear game. I think it was twice in the 1920s. That was the biggest game in town.
Yeah.
Newspaper coverage, a full page devoted to the preview, the game story. The Packers never got coverage like the East-West game did in those early years. What changed everything was in 1929. Packers went to New York. That was when the championship was determined by league standings, and they beat the Giants. They played 12 players. 10 of them played all 60 minutes. 1 player left in the last minute, and they put in a sub. Packers won. They won their first league championship, and they became the darling of the New York sports writers. No TV, very little radio. Games weren't broadcast. Just started to be broadcast on radio, at least in Green Bay. And so when most NFL games are attracting 12,000 fans, all of a sudden the Packers and the Giants are drawing 35,000 plus in New York. They're drawing close to 30,000 for the Packer-Bear games in Chicago. So the Packers obviously made the Maras and the Hallases became great friends of the franchise because they were putting money in their pockets.
And they kept winning.
So the Packers for many years were the biggest drawing card in pro football. And that's what helped them survive when they, City Stadium was a 15,000-seat stadium in the mid-30s.
Right, yeah, over at East High.
When they won their 4th NFL title. They couldn't even play the title game.
And they're still the top draw. Remember Mark Murphy a couple of weeks ago said that Packer-Patriot game was the most coveted game in the NFL schedule by every broadcast network this year. and it got to NBC on a Sunday night. There's still that draw. Got to take a break. When we come back, more with Cliff Christl. Fascinating evening, talking the good old days of the green and gold, or back then it was the blue and gold, to tell you the truth. Yes, we'll take a break, and when we come back, the
sounds
gold,
like it was the drunken gold.
Yeah,
actually.
no kidding. We'll come back with more right after this timeout.
We now return you to the fifth quarter, live from the Stadium View Bar and Grill. Here are Mark Daniels and Matt Z.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Having a fun time tonight talking about the good old days of the green and gold. But we got to play some games ourselves. We had a hot play winner down earlier. Let's see if we can't find a cold play. Take home a prize from Robinson tonight. Get qualified for that Lions game with the indoor club seats in the chill of December at Lambeau. All right, speaking of cold, let's get a cold play winner. Z, what do you got?
We have Bruce up. There's a lot of pressure on Bruce because he traveled all the way here from Detroit just to try to win the Robinson's cooler.
Nice.
On the cold play. He said it's the only reason why he came. He heard Robinson coolers are the best.
All right. Well, it is the Lions.
Bruce,
coming. You'll have to come back.
What's your guess?
All right, Mark, I'm going to go with the Josh Jackson interception, which could have led to Green Bay
really could have.
touchdown, and it was called back by a penalty.
Yeah. Well, we're picking the winners. We had a pick on the
Nailed
hot play.
it.
We got a pick on the cold play as well. Yes, it took points off the board for the Pack, and it was another Josh Jackson gem.
Snap to Cook in the shotgun. Lots of time. Throws the right side, and it is intercepted with a penalty marker down. It is Jackson down the left sideline to the end zone for a touchdown. Another pick six for the Iowa rookie. 35-yard return.
Prior to the interception, holding, defense, number 26, 5-yard penalty.
On the other side of the field. That's a shame.
Isn't it? Yeah. That is the shame.
That is a real shame. Herb Waters, what are you doing on the other side of the field? As for Josh Jackson, he was really hoping he could make it back-to-back pick sixes in the preseason.
Kind of heartbreaking, man. Every time those are big play opportunities that can change the outcome of the game. And, if those stand, we're looking at a whole different situation right now. So, but, we just you got to fight through it. There's some adversity. You just got to, fight through it, man. So not everything's going to be perfect. Not everything's going to go your way. And it just happened tonight that things didn't really go our way. So we have to just fight through those and, just keep making more plays.
Kid's making plays. That kid is making plays.
They're
Josh
ball
Jackson.
hawks. These young guys, they get after it.
Yeah, the emergence of Alexander and Jackson really made Lindsey Pipkins expendable, so he was shipped to Indianapolis for that trade for linebacker Antonio Morrison, which was the big news on Sunday. Got big news Saturday. Brian Gutekunst going to have to cut this roster to 53. We'll spend a little bit of time before we're done tonight on some of, I think, the key roster battles. But as long as we got them, let's keep talking about Cliff. We talked about the glory of run of the Pack in the 20s, but it wore on. Curley got a couple of more championships, Cliff, but by the late 40s, how did it turn sour?
Well, some fans started to grumble about the fact that Curley had gone Hollywood. In 1932, the Packers took a barnstorming trip to Hawaii. The end of the season, at that time, the Packers would take an Eastern road trip, play as many as 4, 5, even 6 games on the road. In 32, they were on the road for the last 32 days of the season. Played, I think it was 6 games. They returned home. They were here for less than 48 hours, and Johnny Blood had arranged a barnstorming tour to California. So they took the train to L.A., caught the USS Mariposa in L.A. for the boat ride to Hawaii. And on that boat ride, 2 players were flirting with a woman who was much younger than Curley, who had won the Miss California contest just a few years earlier.
All right.
And as they were fighting over her, Curley interceded, won the woman. When they came back from Hawaii, which was another month later, so essentially they were gone for like 70 days.
Wow.
He told Marguerite, his wife of by then 13 years, 14 years, that he wanted a divorce. That was his high school sweetheart, and he ended up marrying this Miss California. They had a brief marriage, and then they got divorced, and then he married the ex-wife of a Hollywood film producer. So he spent a lot of time in California, and he was accused of both going Hollywood, and some of the executive committee members felt like times had changed in the NFL and he needed to be minding the store more during the off season, which he wasn't. I think that was part of it. They started losing in the late 40s, but two things embittered two members, longtime allies, people who were with him from the beginning. Before the 1945 season, he replaced Dr. W.W. Kelly, who was one of the former presidents of the Packers, one of the Hungry Five, one of the original members of the executive committee as team physician. And before 1947 season, he replaced George Whitney Calhoun, the co-founder, as his PR guy with George Strickler from Chicago. Neither of those went over well, and from that day forward, Calhoun and Kelly were bitter enemies, along with the local attorney, Gerald Clifford. Lee used to tell me that Calhoun, to the day he died in 1963, told people he wanted to outlive Lambeau so he could pee on his grave. That's how bitter it was.
Wow. Nice.
And then, you know, Curly was still playing the Notre Dame box as late as 46, a version of it still in the late 40s. And things turned sour on the field. And Calhoun and Kelly and Clifford couldn't get the votes to oust him at a bitter meeting in 1949. But Lambeau then resigned shortly after that.
That was the meeting at what? Was that at the
Brown County Courthouse?
Yeah.
November 30th, 1949.
Yeah.
Still probably the most contentious meeting in Packers history.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Have you always had a passion for history?
Yes, my grandmother instilled it in me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
She taught me that I knew the presidents in order probably by the time I was 5, 7 years old because of her.
When did you really start getting, I don't want to say obsessed, but it almost seems like it, with this franchise? When did you really start wanting to know more about how this franchise came to be?
Well, I covered it for many years, so I was becoming more familiar with its history. I didn't live it like Lee Remmel did. And then in the 80s, there were a couple books written, one by Larry Names, who pointed out all the discrepancies between what was kind of accepted history and
folklore.
Yeah, and what he claimed was basically fiction. And I found it interesting, but I was working for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel at the time, and as I read the book, I thought, boy, this is interesting, but he doesn't offer any proof or even evidence. It's like he speculates on why this might have been. So I felt as a newspaper writer covering the team, I couldn't really use what was in that book without verifying it. So I started one by one checking out these stories and found out, yes, those stories were myth, the accepted history, what had become the accepted history. But at the same time, what Names wrote was mostly BS with no foundation. And so then I started researching each of these subjects and trying to get to the bottom of the real story. But there are a lot of things about Packers history we'll never know. I mean, I feel like I know a lot, but the more I learn, the more I feel like the less I know.
There's just so little documentation, and you would have thought that Calhoun would have probably been a little more diligent, being a newspaper man, to...
Well, that's not... there is documentation. The problem is the only place you can find it is in the Green Bay Press-Gazette. Press-Gazette covered the Packers better than any other paper in any other NFL city. The one exception might have been Rock Island, the short time Rock Island was in the league. But the coverage was thorough. Problem was, the only way you could read it was to grind microfilm.
Yeah.
And that's what I finally ended up doing. I started with January 1, 1919, and started reading Press Gazettes and read it for 40 years, day by day. And that took close to 15 years, and I wrote very little about the history until I got done with that process.
Yeah, and I was fascinated just conversing with your predecessor, Lee Remmel. I can't tell you how many hours I would just either sit in his office or be on the road and just let him regale and embellish everything he knew and experienced about this team. It's just fascinating.
He knew a lot,
Yeah.
great storyteller. He was willing to share it with all of us. I interviewed him many times. I wish I could interview him.
Yeah, me
Still
too.
interview him many more times.
Yeah, I agree. No question about it. We didn't even get to the really fun stuff, the glory years and how Lombardi got here and everything else. But hey, it'll be in your book, I'm sure. Great stuff, Cliff, as always. It was a real pleasure having you on board. Glad you could spend some time. Good luck with all of the projects this year. It should be a blast when it comes out.
Appreciate it. Enjoyed it, and thank you for coming.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Cliff Christl, Packer team historian. We got to take a break. When we come back, a couple of quick notes on the week that will be coming for the Pack, and we'll give away our grand prize when we come back right after this time out from the Stadium View.
Here are Mark Daniels and Matt Z.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Woohoo! Walking, talking encyclopedia, that gentleman.
Yeah,
I'll tell you what. And it's good
honestly-
to know that alcohol played such a big role in our friendship and in the Packers' history.
It's the common bond.
It is the bond
that brings so many people together. Absolutely. And for people listening, just so they know, the guy had no notes. It's just an encyclopedia
It's
of
unbelievable.
knowledge.
A great guy, great friend. I was glad he could come over tonight.
Yeah, it was cool.
Next week, the players start coming in, ladies and gentlemen, and a lot of players are leaving as they get down to 53. I wish I could tell you more about what I think about that, but check out the blog, News from the Pack blog on your Midwest Communication Radio Station website, and I'll have it all for you later in the week. We got to send somebody to the Packer Pro Shop from our friends at Robinson's. Who's going shopping?
Tom S.
Tom S.
Tom S.
Tom S. is the winner tonight. We got more door prizes to come. We are back Monday night. I know it's Labor Day, but spend your holiday with us. For Matt Z, I'm Mark Daniels. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great week. So long, everybody.